A pleasure to me all at last, and welcome back once again to films I should have talked about years ago. And so, with all the Christmas stuff going on, why don't I just go on ahead and spend a full week talking about Christmas movies? Because I have seen a lot of them over the years, some of which I've seen multiple times, and some I haven't even had the chance to talk about. Not quite yet though. So, what we're gonna do here is talk a bit about 7 Christmas movies for the next whole week. So, the first of which that I have decided was one that I actually saw on Tubi some time ago, known as Jingle All the Way. This, of course, is a movie that is about to be 30 years old in a few weeks, because it came out in 1996. And a few weeks from now, we'll be in 2026. So, 30-year anniversary for this one. But as much as some people might like this film here, I myself actually find a much higher interest in a film like this, especially knowing for what era it came in, and of course, what kind of a film it is in general. It is a combination of different things. You got Arnold Schwarzenegger, you got Sinbad, you got comedy, you got action and adventure, and of course you have the never-ending Easter egg hunt for a certain doll based on a popular character known as Turbo Man. And well, as we see from Jake Lloyd's character, a young boy whom is in fact the father of Arnold Schwarzenegger's own Howard Langston. Jamie Langston, whom is his son, is a big fan of a certain franchise called Turbo Man, and it turns out that the Turbo Man franchise is so big that it takes up pretty much the entirety of civilization. I mean, we know that the real-life equivalent by this point is the Avengers, or DC, depending on where you're going at with this. But it does seem that Marvel is making a huge comeback in the next few years, because we got a lot of video games and a lot of movies coming up. So the MCU, I guess, is going to be going through a swift retribution after a few years of mishandling and misguidance. So, Turbo Man, of course, is so popular that Jamie wants a Turbo Man doll himself for Christmas. And it's not just any Turbo Man doll. It's got the jetpacks, the missile fists, and several different choices of dialogue, including the all-time famous line known as, "It's Turbo Time." So, despite coming home late from work, as well as a bit of a traffic issue on the highway, as well as missing Jamie's karate event, Howard Langston does make it his personal commitment to find a Turbo Man doll. Because even though they're on Christmas break, there's going to be a lot of Christmas shopping happening before Christmas itself even occurs. So what happens? Well, the following morning when they wake up, Howard decides to get out of bed and go straight on to where he calls work, but he is instead going on a hunt for a Turbo Man doll because he made the false proclamation that he himself already got a Turbo Man doll sometime before, exactly the way Jamie described it to him. And more importantly, his wife is not exactly on the ropes with this idea of him going to work, especially when there's actually going to be a Christmas parade with Turbo Man himself in the very rear, and the most highly anticipated thing of the entirety of the parade. That is something that Howard should never miss. Well, in any case though, Howard does go on his little quest. He himself goes on a more localized toy store in the city, in which that we get to see our Sinbad character known as Myron. He himself is a mailman who goes on an epic rant about Turbo Man and the kinds of things that are wrong with society in terms of commercialization and consumerism. And it goes on for a while. Sinbad is just screaming his lungs out about how cheap pieces of plastic are being put on the TV and children are just brainwashed by all the commercials that go on. It's really funny. That's how life used to be that way. Imagine if that was the thing today. Imagine if Avengers got so big that every single shelf in every single store was just flooded with Avengers related stuff. And not just merchandise, but other things as well, with Avengers logos painted on them. Well, in any case though, when the store finally opens after a while standing outside and with a huge group of people, they all flood in and go straight to the toy section. Both Myron and Howard come across no Turbo Man dolls whatsoever. Mostly a booster doll, which is the not so beloved character of the franchise. A certain pink-furred creature that is kind of more like a crappy sidekick to Turbo Man himself. But all in all, they have no luck finding the doll. Even asking the clerks about the Turbo Man doll sends them in a pretty big fit of laughter, and it is incredibly embarrassing. This is another thing I feel like could never happen today. Imagine if, apart from the mass commercialization of Avengers, and you ask there's a certain Avengers doll that they need for Christmas, everybody starts laughing at you for it. I mean, that's why you gotta hate the 90s and live here in the slobbering 20s instead, where life is simpler now. Embarrassment and consumerism just ain't much of a thing anymore, you know? We got so much more to worry about than just the Avengers. And we definitely don't have much to lose because people have seen everything by this point, right? Remember when I talked about Welcome to Marwen and there's a guy wearing heels, stilettos that weren't invented till 1954? Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of things that people didn't understand back then. But nowadays, it's kind of out in the open, along with a lot of other stuff, but I don't want to get too off track here. So Howard makes it his mission to go to other stores, as many as he could find, and if he finds a Turbo Man doll, then he will basically have it wrapped up and put underneath the tree at his house for Jamie to open on Christmas Day. While all this is happening, though, there are some cookies being made in the oven, with Liz Langston basically going up to take a shower, and the neighbor, Phil Hartman himself, seriously, Ted Martin, basically a neighbor that was actually really good with handling the Christmas decorations and has also been able to assist with having his own son as well as Jamie be set under control while also taste testing the cookies that Liz had made for them. Of course, he was not allowed to touch the cookies, especially if Howard was around, but because he was not in the house, that kind of was just an excuse for him to get off on that sort of stuff. But a phone call to the house does let him know that he is in fact eating the cookies. And this is probably the most remembered thing of the entire film. Howard just yells at him to put the cookie down now. And I swear, people have been memeing on that the whole time. Even Arnold Schwarzenegger himself remade that over 25 years later. That's truly how you remake a certain thing that happened in the mid-90s. Well, in any case, though, once he gets off the phone, Howard continues on his search, and we do have more Myron as well. It just seems that the two are tag teaming here and there. Howard is, of course, insisting to do things on his own terms, but Myron is not letting him hear the end of whatever he's trying to do. Because, lo and behold, he himself is a mailman armed to the teeth with all sorts of crazy packages in his truck. And of course, he's also hunting for a Turbo Man doll himself. He does say he has his own child that he's trying to get a Turbo Man doll for Christmas, but like he would buy that. Like Howard Langston himself would buy that. This is the same Arnold Schwarzenegger whom has terminated people, pumped iron, and of course became the all-time famous Running Man. Just to name a few other feats that Arnold was able to do. But with this, though, he truly becomes more than just a unique dad. A dad who is more busy with work and doesn't spend much time with his family, but more than makes up for it with the mass commitments that he makes with his own son on the line. I should probably also mention that Jake Lloyd is the guy who plays Jamie Langston. Yeah, the same Jake Lloyd who would also be famous for playing Anakin Skywalker in the Star Wars prequel films. But that's a whole different story. Far, far away. Well, in any case, though, it all leads up to a radio station in a high-rise building in which that Howard and Myron break into the office in which that the guy is recording his voiceovers on, especially knowing that they were at a diner earlier, and all in all, the DJ basically ends up calling the police on all this. A lot of cars show up just because two guys broke into a studio. That's a little excessive, don't you think? It's just two guys breaking into the studio. It's not the guy being assaulted or the place being held hostage or terrorism and all that. But like I said, this is why you gotta hate the 90s. Too many cop cars are showing up for just one little problem that happened in one large building. So, end of story there. But it does get even more crazy from here, because even though Howard and Myron are basically held at gunpoint by the cops, Myron pulls out a package that he claims there's a bomb inside and forces the cops to lay down their weapons while they both walk away. Of course, Howard is able to get very far, and Myron is about to do the same thing as well. But, of course, it is a bomb inside, and they didn't know about this until, boom, too late. But the thing is, though, is that while Officer Alexander, the lead in this whole thing, he's basically considered to be one of the antagonists, because this is, believe it or not the last time that Howard will encounter him. It's not just for what happens in the building in which that a bomb is blown up in his face, but Officer Alexander becomes more common later on in the plot. I should also mention that there was also an incredible Santa fight that goes on, because in one particular mall known as the Mall of America, which is in fact in the Twin Cities, St. Paul, Minneapolis, Minnesota. So I guess this film takes place in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, or somewhere by that logic. So there was a bunch of Santas in some sort of underground toy business. And it's a pretty sleazy criminal empire that is found by the cops, and Howard is able to cleverly sneak away, disguised as a detective, with a badge and all that he just manages to find somewhere in the building. So it all comes down to one big, amazing final moment. Because, lo and behold, it's time for the celebration to take place, with the parade happening and all that. The streets are basically closed off, and the people just watch on the sides as the streets eventually become flooded with all sorts of performers, characters like Sonic the Hedgehog and Cap in the Hat, and a ton of other unique pop culture icons at the time. I will say that it's a pretty impressive level of display that they made. A lot of copyrighted characters. It was common in the 90s to have these mega crossovers take place with all the licensing and all that taken care of, but you rarely get that anymore for some reason. Probably because royalties cost more, or probably because there's even more complications set upon in terms of, yeah, you know what, I'm just going to keep defending the 20s like I've always done so. But hate the 90s or not, it all boils down to an impressive final sequence. Howard Langston is mistakenly identified as the volunteer for the Turbo Man character. And I'm not kidding by saying that a crew ends up de-dressing him really quickly while another guy is just flapping his gums at him. He's a pretty young guy from what I can tell. Probably even for the time. But Howard is dressed up as Turbo Man, given a bunch of cues and a bunch of commands, and there's also a guy inside of a booster costume. Him is taking a smoke break before it's time for them to hit the streets in the parade, and even when they do so, it's not quite over yet. There is essentially another guy dressed as the main antagonist of Turbo Man, who himself is assassinated by Myron. Yeah, Myron assumes the costume of the bad guy himself, hoping to get more taste of blood from Howard Langston himself. And just think, Howard himself was badly shunned from the family because he stole the likes of Martin's gifts from his house. That's because Martin himself had already picked up a gift for his son. And his son is best friends with Howard's son. So Jamie and Martin are basically best friends, if you will, in addition to being neighbors. But what happens here is that after all the stuff that comes through, the Turbo Man float is finally seen with Turbo Man and Booster on top of it, it gets really crazy because while Howard has little trouble operating the costume that he was fitted in and doing all the sorts of poses that associates with the character and actually doing a pretty convincing job, he is eventually called on to announce the winner of a free Turbo Man doll that appears right in front of him. So this whole time, the thing about that radio DJ that we heard earlier was actually because when Howard got the answer right before that phone was broken at that diner, thanks to that fight that he had with Myron earlier, it all led up to basically a contest winner at the parade So one Turbo Man doll was kept secret from everybody because it was a special occasion, and on top of that, it was going to be considered a grand prize for one young boy that Howard Langston might as well be lucky to have assumed the role of Turbo Man himself, because he just announces Jamie's voice right there and right then. Jamie is more than excited to go up to the Turbo Man float to grab a hold of his free doll as an early Christmas present, but what happens? The bad guy comes down. Myron himself ends up stealing the doll and Jamie with him and takes off. Howard has pretty much little choice but to activate the included jetpack and the missile fists that come around whenever the time is necessary. Jamie, of course, does instruct them on what to do, and of course, they're all basically hanging onto a sign for dear life, while Howard struggles to get the jetpack working. And I'll be honest with you guys, the animation that they used here is a little crappy, even for the time in 1996, because Toy Story was already out. I mean, if they were going to go with the CG sort of rendition for the animation sequence of Turbo Man flight, then they probably could have done a little bit of a better job. Maybe hired some actual Pixar studio animators. Who really knows? Well, when it all comes down to, the Turbo Man doll is saved, Jamie is saved, and even Myron is spared from a massive fall to his death. He, of course, is taken into custody for what he's done, especially with Officer Alexander pinning a lot of blame on him, because, after all, with the bomb sequence, evading from the cops, and threats and all that stuff, he does deserve some time in jail. But, before that happens, a pretty shocking twist of fate comes by. Jamie takes his free Turbo Man doll that he got from the Turbo Man himself and hands it to Myron instead, allowing him to keep his free Turbo Man doll that he's been seeking for a while. So, what comes around shall go around. But the real big twist here, though, happens when Jamie consoles about his father not coming in on the parade. But then, the helmet comes off. Howard Langston was the Turbo Man the whole time, and even though this was something that was mistakenly occurring, it happened anyways. I guess because fate wanted him to be the Turbo Man for his son to be proud of, and more importantly for the rest of his family and anybody else to take in a lot of proud, honorable moments. The whole rest of the city, in fact, does salute Howard, mainly for not only being the Turbo Man, but also for being the man to put an end to his arch nemesis. I mean, you got Turbo Man fighting against his antagonist, and Howard with a bit of a feud against Myron, a postal guy who went this whole time was just hoping to get a Turbo Man doll, probably for himself, despite his claim of having his own child. But we don't really hear much about him after that point. Either way, though, I really like this film. And I don't care what many people out there say, and I don't even care what Rotten Tomatoes has to say about it either. The score being in the 20s, for them, a little brutal if you ask me. Because the slapstick, the comedy, the action and adventure, and of course the unique twists that come around in the film's plot and storyline, plus the emotional sequences and even an actual reindeer. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, you guys. Because like I said, this was the 90s. Look at all the crap that they did back then. A lot of terrible movies were made that same era just as well. Because that's just how it was back then. And nowadays, if a crappy movie comes out, it's not exactly nothing like what we had back then. So for that, I'm proud to give Jingle All the Way a pretty grandiose 8.3 out of 10.1. Some might think of it as being too generous, others might think of it as being a bit meager, but really, it's still a good film. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jake Lloyd at some of their best that they could do. I kind of wish we had a little more Jake Lloyd in spite of the problems he's went through since then. But even if he does come back to acting, I doubt we'll recognize him in any ways like his own younger self did. So, I will have 6 more films in line that I'll be talking about pretty soon. But if you want to see more, go down to my channel. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side.